was a cool Saturday evening in a neighborhood park on the outskirts of Bridgeport, Connecticut. The kind of evening where kids played soccer, parents chatted on picnic benches, and the air buzzed with the sounds of life. 16-year-old Jamal sat alone on a worn wooden bench near the soccer field, flipping through a beat-up library book. His clothes, simple jeans and a faded hoodie, spoke of his modest upbringing, but his posture exuded quiet confidence. Jamal was waiting for his little brother, Deshaun, to finish soccer practice. It was a routine their mother insisted on, knowing how much Deshaun looked up to his big brother. But tonight, routine gave way to unease. The sudden growl of motorcycles echoed through the park, disrupting the calm. A group of bikers pulled in, their leather jackets and intimidating presence casting an immediate shadow over the once peaceful scene.
Before we dive into today's story, we'd love your support. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more inspiring stories just for you. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
The park was a modest escape tucked into the outskirts of Bridgeport, where patches of green grass met cracked concrete walkways. Rusted swings creaked as children played, and weathered benches sat under old oak trees, their bark worn smooth from years of use. Despite its worn appearance, the park was a gathering place for families, a small haven in a neighborhood that had seen its share of struggles. Jamal sat near the soccer field, his lean frame hunched over a second-hand library book. His jeans were a bit frayed at the edges, and his hoodie, faded blue with a slight tear in the sleeve, was the warmest thing he owned. His sneakers, once white, were now a muted grey, but they were clean, a testament to his pride in appearance despite his family's limited means. Jamal had learned early that it wasn't what you wore that defined you, but how you carried yourself. Though quiet and reserved, Jamal was sharp and observant, traits honed through years of necessity. He was protective of his younger brother, Deshaun, a lively 10-year-old with boundless energy and a smile that could light up a room. Deshaun was finishing soccer practice nearby, darting across the field with the kind of carefree enthusiasm Jamal admired, but often felt he had to shield. Their mother, a single parent working double shifts as a nurse, relied on Jamal to look after Deshaun when she couldn't be there. Tonight was no different. Jamal's calm demeanor wasn't just a natural disposition, it was the result of discipline. For years, he had trained at the local community center under the mentorship of Mr. Williams, a retired martial arts instructor who saw potential in Jamal. Strength isn't about fighting, Mr. Williams often said, it's about control. Jamal took those words to heart, practicing relentlessly not just to defend himself, but to embody the focus and discipline his mentor had taught him. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park, Jamal kept one eye on his brother and the other on the book in his lap. The faint hum of the soccer game filled the air, punctuated by cheers and the thud of the ball. It was a scene of everyday simplicity, yet one that carried a quiet weight. For Jamal, these moments were precious, a chance to be both a brother and a protector, even if it meant sitting on a cold bench after a long day. But just as he began to relax, the low growl of motorcycle engines rolled in from the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jamal glanced up, his brow furrowing, as 5 bikers entered the park, their presence jarring against the peaceful backdrop. He shifted in his seat, his instincts sharpening. Something about the way they moved made his stomach tighten. The sudden roar of motorcycle engines shattered the park's tranquility, drawing curious glances from the parents on the benches and the kids playing on the field. The bikers rolled in like they owned the place, their leather jackets and heavy boots standing out starkly against the park's relaxed, family-friendly atmosphere. Their motorcycles, glinting under the fading sunlight, came to a stop near the soccer field. The loud engines died down, but an uneasy silence followed as the group dismounted. Jamal watched them from the corner of his eye, his posture stiffening slightly. He didn't need to stare to feel the weight of their presence. It wasn't just their appearance, rough, grizzled, and out of place, but the way they moved, scanning the park like they were looking for something or someone. Then their eyes landed on him. Jamal glanced up briefly, locking eyes with one of them. The man was tall and broad, his shaved head glistening under the dimming sun. A jagged scar ran down his cheek, adding to the menace of his scowl. The others, equally intimidating, stood behind him like a pack waiting for their leader's command. Jamal quickly averted his gaze, returning it to his book. But the knot in his stomach tightened. The leader, Tank, nudged one of his crew and nodded in Jamal's direction. "Looks like we got ourselves a loner," he muttered loud enough for Jamal to hear. His voice carried a mocking edge that made Jamal's grip on his book tighten. He kept his expression neutral, his mother's advice ringing in his ears. "Stay calm, Jamal. Don't let them see they've got to you." But calm was hard to maintain when trouble was walking straight toward you. Tank led the group, his boots crunching against the gravel as they approached. Jamal didn't look up, but he could feel their shadows growing closer. The air around him seemed to thicken, the once faint hum of the soccer game now drowned out by the sound of his own heartbeat. "What's a kid like you doing out here all alone?" Tank's gruff voice broke the silence. Jamal looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. "I'm not alone," he said evenly, motioning toward the soccer field where Deshaun was still playing. Tank smirked, glancing at the field before looking back at Jamal. "Waiting for your little brother, huh? That's sweet." His tone was laced with mockery, and the way he said "sweet" sent a chill down Jamal's spine. The other bikers chuckled, their laughter low and threatening. One of them, a wiry man with a long beard, added, "You look a little out of place here, don't you? What, you think you own this park or something?" Jamal shook his head, keeping his tone calm. "It's a public park. I'm just here to pick up my brother." Tank took a step closer, invading Jamal's personal space. The smell of leather and cigarette smoke was overpowering. "Smart mouth, huh? You think you're tough, kid?" Jamal's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Years of martial arts training had taught him to measure his words and actions. Fights weren't won with bravado, they were won with discipline. Tank leaned in closer, his face just inches from Jamal's. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dropping into a growl. Jamal met his gaze, his voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." Tank's smirk widened. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" he sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Jamal's hands rested on his knees, loose but ready. He had no intention of making the first move, but he could feel the tension rising, like a storm about to break. He glanced briefly at the soccer field where Deshaun was still playing, unaware of what was happening. Tank straightened up and glanced back at his crew. "Maybe we should teach this kid some manners," he said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. The others laughed again, their voices echoing ominously across the park. Jamal's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. He didn't know how far this would go, but one thing was clear. The bikers weren't going to back off anytime soon. Tank's smirk deepened as he circled Jamal, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. The other bikers spread out, creating a loose semicircle around him. Their laughter had faded, replaced by low murmurs and knowing glances. They were closing in, testing Jamal's boundaries. "Why so quiet, kid?" Tank asked, his voice sharp and taunting. He tapped a gloved finger on Jamal's shoulder, lingering there a moment too long. "Not so tough now, huh?" Jamal inhaled deeply, forcing his body to remain still. Mr. Williams' voice echoed in his mind. "The best fight is the one you don't have to fight. Stay calm, read the situation, and act only if you have no other choice." I'm not looking for trouble, Jamal repeated, his voice steady. He kept his hands resting loosely on his knees, his posture unthreatening, but deliberate. Tank scoffed, clearly unimpressed. Not looking for trouble? He leaned down, his face mere inches from Jamal's. Well, maybe trouble's looking for you. The bikers laughed again, the sound harsher now, more menacing. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, stepped closer, his arms crossed. You think you're better than us? Sitting here with your fancy book, acting all high and mighty? Jamal's jaw tightened. He didn't respond, knowing any reaction would only escalate the situation. Instead, he shifted his gaze briefly toward the soccer field. Deshaun's game was wrapping up. He was gathering his things and chatting with his coach. Relief and dread clashed in Jamal's chest. Tank noticed the glance and followed it, his smirk widening when he spotted Deshaun. That your little brother? He asked, motioning toward the field. Cute kid. Looks like he's got a lot of energy. Jamal's stomach dropped. His protective instincts flared, but he forced himself to stay composed. Leave him out of this, he said, his voice firmer now. Tank straightened up and laughed, the sound grating. Relax, kid. We're just making conversation. He turned to his crew, gesturing toward the field. Maybe we should go introduce ourselves to the little guy. Teach him a thing or two. Jamal stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. His calm demeanor hadn't cracked, but there was a new intensity in his eyes. He stepped forward, subtly shifting his weight into a balanced stance. You're not going anywhere near him, Jamal said, his voice low, but edged with steel. The bikers froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden shift in his tone. Then Tank's smirk returned, this time tinged with irritation. Look at this tough guy, he said, motioning to the others. Think you can stop us? Before Jamal could respond, a voice broke through the tension. Jamal! Deshaun was running toward them, his soccer ball tucked under one arm, his face lit with excitement. The moment he saw the bikers, though, his steps slowed, and his expression turned cautious. What's going on? He asked, looking from Jamal to the men surrounding him. Stay back, Deshaun, Jamal said firmly, his eyes never leaving Tank. But Tank grinned, his gaze shifting to the younger boy. Hey there, little man, he called out, his tone mockingly cheerful. We were just having a friendly chat with your big brother. Why don't you come join us? Deshaun hesitated, his grip tightening on the soccer ball. I don't want to, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. Jamal felt a surge of pride at his brother's courage, but his focus remained on the bikers. I said leave him out of this, Jamal repeated, stepping slightly to the side to shield Deshaun from their view. Tank's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of frustration. You've got a smart mouth, kid, he said, stepping closer to Jamal. And I don't like smart mouths. The others began to close in again, their movements slow and deliberate. Jamal's mind raced, assessing the situation. He knew he couldn't count on anyone in the park to step in, not yet at least. It was up to him to keep Deshaun safe. Jamal took another deep breath, centering himself. His stance shifted ever so slightly, his weight balanced, his muscles ready. He could feel the tension in the air thickening, the unspoken challenge hanging between them. Last warning, Jamal said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of authority that surprised even him. Walk away. Tank chuckled, though it sounded forced. Or what? He said, taking one more step forward. Jamal didn't answer. He didn't need to. His focus was absolute, his body prepared for whatever came next. The air was electric with tension, each moment stretching longer than the last. Tank took another step forward, his towering frame looming over Jamal. What's the matter, kid? Scared? He taunted, his voice low and mocking. Jamal stayed still, his breathing steady, his mind focused. He wasn't scared. He was ready. Tank smirked, reaching out with one massive hand to shove Jamal backward, but Jamal moved like water, sidestepping the shove with practiced ease. Tank stumbled slightly, caught off guard, his smirk fading into a look of confusion. The pause didn't last long. Tank's momentary surprise turned into anger. "You think you're funny?" he growled, lunging at Jamal with more force this time. What happened next was so quick, so precise, that it took the bikers a moment to register what had occurred. Jamal shifted his weight, pivoting smoothly to avoid Tank's charge. His arm shot up, deflecting Tank's outstretched hand with a sharp, controlled motion. Using the momentum, Jamal twisted Tank's wrist and stepped forward, forcing him to stagger backward in pain. "You don't want to do this," Jamal said calmly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. But Tank wasn't listening. Clutching his wrist, he barked at the others, "Get him!" Two bikers rushed forward, their movements less coordinated and more impulsive. The first swung a wild punch, but Jamal ducked effortlessly, stepping inside the man's reach. With a swift kick to the side of the biker's knee, Jamal sent him crumpling to the ground, clutching his leg with a pained groan. The second hesitated for a fraction of a second, clearly surprised, but it was long enough for Jamal to react. He pivoted on his heel, delivering a spinning kick that struck the man's ribs with precision. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he stumbled back, gasping and clutching his side. By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of bystanders. Parents and kids on the field had stopped what they were doing to watch, their murmurs growing louder. Some had pulled out their phones, capturing the unfolding scene. Tank, red-faced with fury, charged at Jamal again, this time swinging both fists in an attempt to overpower him with brute force. But Jamal didn't meet strength with strength. He stayed light on his feet, dodging the punches with an agility that came from years of training. "Stay down," Jamal said firmly, his voice carrying an air of authority that made Tank pause for a split second. But Tank wasn't ready to back down. He lunged again, this time attempting to grab Jamal's hoodie. Jamal reacted instantly, twisting out of Tank's grip and delivering a sharp strike to his solar plexus. Tank froze, his body folding slightly as he gasped for air. "Enough," Jamal said, his voice rising above the noise of the crowd. His stance remained strong, his hands loose but ready. There was no malice in his expression, only resolve. "I don't want to hurt you. Walk away." Tank staggered backward, his tough exterior cracking under the weight of his own frustration and Jamal's calm control. He glanced at his crew, one on the ground, groaning in pain, and the other clutching his ribs, struggling to stay upright. For a moment, it seemed like Tank might try one last time. But the murmurs from the growing crowd and the steady, unyielding gaze of Jamal seemed to weigh on him. Finally, he straightened up, glaring at Jamal with a mix of anger and reluctant respect. "Let's go," Tank growled, waving at his crew to follow. The bikers limped back to their motorcycles, muttering curses under their breath. As Tank mounted his bike, he turned back to Jamal, pointing a finger at him. "This ain't over, kid," he spat, before revving his engine and roaring off into the distance. Jamal didn't move, his breathing steady, his stance unwavering, until the sound of the motorcycles faded completely. Only then did he let out a quiet exhale, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The crowd erupted into applause, murmurs of admiration and disbelief rippling through the group. Parents pointed, kids whispered, and more than one phone was still pointed in Jamal's direction. Deshaun ran up to him, his face a mixture of awe and concern. "Jamal, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jamal knelt down, resting a hand on Deshaun's shoulder. "I'm fine," he said, offering a small smile. "Let's go home." As the sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance, Jamal straightened up, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since the bikers approached. Around him, the crowd began to disperse, though some lingered, murmuring in awe of what they had just witnessed. The park's normal rhythm slowly returned, but for Jamal, everything felt changed. Deshawn stood by his side, gripping his soccer ball tightly. His wide eyes were a mixture of fear, awe, and confusion. "Jamal," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure you're okay? That was crazy." Jamal knelt down so he was eye level with his little brother, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "I'm okay, Deshawn, and you are too. That's all that matters," he said calmly. Deshawn hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "How did you do all that? I mean, they were so big, and there were 3 of them." Jamal smiled faintly, shaking his head. "It's not about being big, Deshawn. It's about being prepared and staying calm. Remember what Mom always says? It's not the size of the person, but the size of their heart." Deshawn frowned, clearly still processing what had happened. "But what if they come back? That guy said it wasn't over." Jamal's face grew serious, and he squeezed Deshawn's shoulder reassuringly. "If they come back, we'll handle it. But listen to me, Deshawn. What happened today wasn't about fighting. It was about standing up for what's right and protecting the people I care about. Violence isn't the answer, unless you have no other choice." Deshawn nodded slowly, his brother's words sinking in. "So, you didn't fight because you wanted to?" "Exactly," Jamal said, his voice firm. "I didn't want to fight. But sometimes you have to stand up and show people you won't let them walk all over you. And when you do, you need to stay calm, think carefully, and act with purpose." The two began walking home, their footsteps soft against the pavement. As they approached their small house, Jamal could see their mother standing on the porch, her arms crossed, and a concerned look on her face. She always waited for them to come home, even after a long day of work, her presence a quiet reminder of her unwavering love and dedication. "You're late," she said, her voice tinged with worry as they walked up the steps. Jamal hesitated, glancing at Deshawn, who stayed quiet. "Something happened at the park," Jamal admitted, his tone careful. He didn't want to scare her, but he also didn't want to lie. Their mother's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp. Jamal recounted the events, keeping his tone calm and measured. He explained how the bikers had approached, how they'd tried to intimidate him, and how he'd defended himself and Deshawn when they wouldn't back down. As he spoke, her eyes glistened with a mix of emotions: fear, pride, and relief. When he finished, she exhaled deeply, shaking her head. "Jamal," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm so proud of you for protecting your brother and standing up for yourself. But you have to promise me something. Don't take risks like that unless you have no other choice. Do you understand?" "I promise, Mom," Jamal said, and he meant it. He could see the weight of the day's events reflected in her eyes, and he didn't want to add to her burdens. That night, as Jamal lay in bed, he replayed the confrontation in his mind. The biker's aggression, the gathering crowd, the way his training had kicked in almost instinctively, it all felt surreal. But what stood out most was the feeling of resolve that had carried him through. Jamal realized that the lessons he had learned from Mr. Williams weren't just about physical skills. They were about discipline, preparation, and integrity. The world wasn't always fair, and there would always be people who tried to push others down. But moments like this proved that staying calm, knowing your worth, and acting with purpose could make all the difference. Looking out his window at the quiet street below, Jamal felt a sense of peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was ready for it. Jamal's story reminds us all that true strength doesn't come from aggression or size. It comes from discipline, courage, and staying calm under pressure. In life, challenges will arise, and while it's not always easy, standing firm in your values and protecting those you love is what truly defines strength. Take a moment to reflect. How would you handle a situation like Jamal's? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or someone you care about? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who could use a reminder of their inner strength. Together, let's spread the message of courage and resilience.